Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm going to do another freestyle like I did yesterday and just see where it goes from here. So, on conclusion of last night's upset between Tells and White, where Tells beat the heavy favorite in his hometown and unfortunately was unable to win the title because he came in overweight. However, that being said, after the fight, I went on X to see what people were saying, and I got to see a very interesting comment where somebody was pretty much saying that if Lamont Roach went up against Isaac Pitbull Cruz, that's essentially how the fight would play out. Because Tells himself is not somebody who usually gets put in there because everybody thinks he's a world beater or he was, in there as a live dog. Actually, if you go and look at the odds like I just did, because I was fairly certain this was another heavy underdog, right? Rolly Romero was another heavy underdog. Nobody expected him to win. In fact, one odds maker had him in the same category as when Hasim Rahman knocked out Lennox Lewis, right? So this victory over White, it is interesting because I understand why people would think that that would be a carbon copy of the Pitbull Cruz fight, right? Because Pitbull is not somebody that you put in there because he's world class, right? Let's be honest. Yeah, he's a former champion. He is technically an elite, but he also is a naturally smaller fighter. He came up from a lower weight. He does, pack a good punch even at 140, but I mean, at the same time, if you put him in there with Lamont Roach, I feel like it would be a lot more of an even fight than people are giving it credit for, right? However, last night did show me something. It did prove that there is another path to victory for Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and it's something that you don't really see a lot, especially in American boxing, and it is what it is, but the body work from Tells was definitely a key factor for his victory. He did what he was supposed to do technically. If you're up against a boxer, a mover, a boxer puncher, the best thing you could do is go to that body early and keep going, keep digging, break his guard down, because he's not going to be, protecting his chin. He'll be protecting his body, leaving himself open. You know the formula. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that it is a good idea that Pitbull should go to the body early if he wants to get the victory. However, I'm still convinced that Roach has really good and underrated inside game. I think his mid-range game especially is underrated. I think that he would be able to keep the fight in the center of the ring and be relatively out of danger. Although, realistically, when you got a bruiser like Isaac Cruz in there with you, anything could happen. Like, he could catch you with a very awkward shot. There's nothing to suggest that this is going to be an easy fight for either men, though. I don't want to say that. But while we're on the subject, right, because I was talking about how boxing's in the dirt because we don't get the fights that we want, that, people are, getting fed up. People who've been watching the sport for 30, 40 years are just leaving randomly because they're sick and tired of waiting for stuff that's not going to happen, right? I feel like the last couple of years of boxing have been very detrimental to the sport and a major factor for why fights are going overseas, because the only person who can pay is a rich prince, essentially. Like, it's sad, but, I was having a conversation earlier this morning with a friend of mine about Terrence Bud Crawford at welterweight, since the Canelo fight's coming up, right? I remember that. It was the most boring, stagnant generation in welterweight, and now we got what we have today as a side result of that, because had they made the fight sooner with Errol Spence, I think that Bud would have been undisputed a lot quicker. I think that he still would have been a dominant force, but I don't think that he would have moved up to 154 at the age of 36, 37. And we would be in the situation where he's fighting Canelo Crawford as an older fighter. I think that maybe they would have got to that fight sooner had things moved a little bit quicker. Problem is that the world, life is not run off of what could have been, what should have been, right? We got to go based on reality. And the reality of the situation is that people didn't get bored overnight with the sport. Things like that happening really drove a wedge in the fan base. And really, if you look at the current trends with like Deontay Wilder talking about fighting Francis Ngannou, that's an interesting matchup. But even if he should not even take that matchup, if he would have made it a couple of years sooner, it may have been bigger than it is today. You know what I mean? Like, there was a point where Francis was riding high off of in my opinion, robbery with Tyson Fury. He did the smart thing. He took the fight with Anthony Joshua. And yeah, he lost badly. I'm not going to lie. But here's the thing. If you look at any resume throughout history, a lot of people would be impressed that somebody would even consider going up with 2 top 5 guys in pro debut and their second fight. I don't give Francis any slack for that. He did something that most people would probably not have the guts to do, right? I mean, you hear a lot of people online talking a lot of stuff. I'm one of those people. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not, but I get on this rant to say that matchups being slow to happen is a huge reason why we're in the boat that we're in today. Even if it's not that big of a fight, Roach versus Pitbull Cruz would still, in my opinion, be something people might be interested in. He's still riding high off that Gervonta Davis draw. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, you're eating off the draw. Technically, it should have been a win because they didn't count that knockdown. When he went to his corner to get his face wiped off, something that is very illegal in any other ring, he would have been disqualified. But because he's Gervonta Tank Davis, they gave him a draw. Back to the present, right? Here's what I'm trying to say. Risk versus reward in boxing is rampant, more than it's ever been. People want to skirt danger as long as possible for the most reward. I can't help that. That's just a fact of life. People do what they do. Not because, for honor and glory, because who cares about honor and glory? This is boxing. No, we want the bag. We don't care about, if it could give us a name, even better. But the primary concern, get rich quick and get out. Now, I don't fault a single person for that, because if you look at Muhammad Ali in his early life, he did, in fact, have something similar to say to that effect. He didn't want to be in boxing for as long as he was. Unfortunately, I'm always reminded of that line by Apollo Creed in Rocky 3. There is no tomorrow, Rocky. There is no tomorrow. Dude, if we lived life like we didn't have a second life, we didn't have a third chance, life is not a video game. You can't respawn. You can't become that same person you were 5 seconds ago. Like that, boxing is one of the best examples, really, of how much can a person take before they break down completely? You know what I mean? Like, you don't come into the sport thinking that you're going to be, leaving with your faculties intact, right? Realistically speaking, if somebody sat you down and said that, okay, I can make you millions and millions of dollars for 36 minutes of your time, I think most people would sit down and listen, right? But would most people understand that getting hit in the head is a very dangerous proposition for most people, and that there are no certainties how many times you could get punched in the face, punched in the head, punched in the body before your body starts to break down and have an adverse effect on you, right? Constant bruising, constant lacerations, constant damage done to the body over time. It does matter. Like, people are not Wolverine. Real life people are not superheroes. People, like anything else, man, given enough time, a person will completely break down. It's just how it is, right? So this is just my 2 cents. And like I said, I'm just going off the cuff here because I just want to get my thoughts out there. But even if Isaac Pitbull Cruz versus Lamont Roach isn't the biggest fight you could have right now. I feel like Gervonta Davis would have been a huge fight, like a night and day comparison. But if you were to put a Lamont Roach with an Isaac Cruz, and he does a lot better than Tank did when he got that split decision. I believe it was a split decision, right? Oh, no, it was a unanimous decision. But remember, Pitbull looked incredible in that fight. A lot of people felt that maybe he should have got more consideration on the cards, but that's neither here nor there. My opinion is that Pitbull, you may have a lot to say about his resume because of how he got the title. I know I do, but you can't say that he was ever a walk in the park for anybody, right? Like, you can make the argument that when he lost his title, that was probably the easiest he ever looked, right? I don't know if Lamont could do something like that per se, but I think that he would put on a more entertaining showing, right? So if you make these matchups now and you let people see who would have won in these potential matchups, yeah, on the right time and date, anybody could win. I think that's a great argument. I think that's the basis of all boxing, is that if you put the right person in with the right guy at the right time, you're going to get fireworks. You're going to get amazing events. And that's what I want to see more of. But it's like, even my friends in Britain will even tell you, like, all the best fights domestically are getting shipped overseas. They're not really showing that many fights anymore. It's a really sad state of affairs. But how did we get here? Say it with me. Over marination. Right? Like, if you would have made Keith Thurman versus Terrence Bud Crawford, don't you think that would have moved the needle just a little bit? Even though he was coming off that loss to Manny Pacquiao. Like, even Manny Pacquiao could have, he could have fought Terrence, but, for better or worse, he didn't, right? So, I feel that holding off and too much risk management is what put us in this position. And I know that there's a lot more to it than that, but, just make the fights. Let's not sit here and pretend like, this is just the most exciting thing in the world to just sit here, hope and pray for a good matchup. Because, like, if you were going to hold your breath for some events like Mobility fighting one of the top guys at 168, I think that you would probably pass away before you would ever see something to that effect right now. You know what I mean? Because 168 is ruled by one man. Thank God he's fighting Terrence Bud Crawford, because that's a good matchup. It probably one of his, if not his most decorated opponent to this date. I will give Terrence his flowers if he wins, but I will also give Crawford his flowers if he wins, because let's not forget, Canelo started at the lower weights as well. It's not just Terrence. Like, Terrence, yes, he started at 135 at a lower weight, but Canelo started at 140, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, just because Terrence is late going into 168, or if he was ever going to go there at all without Canelo, is irrelevant, because he's taking the risk. And that's more than I can say for a lot of fighters who didn't over the years. You know what I mean? So I'm just starting with Roach, ending with Canelo Crawford. I think that these guys, if they want to, if boxing continues to be a thing in the West, in the United States, one of the major things that needs to happen is the fights need to happen now. From lower level to top level. I understand shit runs downhill, but the problem is that sometimes you got to work a little bit harder to get your name out there and get people to pay attention to you also. Like, this is not a one-way street where a promotional company is going to make your whole career, make it break even, right? It's on you. One of the beautiful things about this sport is that you go in by yourself and you get all the rewards for yourself. And so depending on how ambitious you are, you can climb the top of the ladder and become something great. Be remembered for all time. That's what a lot of these guys want. That's a byproduct of getting the big fights, right? Is the glory. But again, that falls back to risk management. Do you really think that Manny Pacquiao wants a Rolly Romero because he's one of the greatest fighters in the world? I don't. Like, in my opinion, I would hope if in a perfect world, I would like to see Rolly Romero unify with Mario Barrios. I think that would be a decent scrap, believe it or not. And I would want him to face the winner of Devin Haney versus Brian Norman Jr. And sad thing is that I could say that, but Rolly's going to do what Rolly's going to do. He's going to fight for the most money. But I think that right now, if he struck while the iron was hot, coming off of that win with Ryan Garcia, he could make a lot of money. He could do something to increase his own notoriety and his own bank account if he were to try to take a risk like that. Would he? It's anyone's game after a certain point who will win and who will lose, but the one who believes in himself the most is the one who's going to come out on top because, yeah, you could say that Rolly is the worst of all the champions next to Mario Barrios, but you put them in the same ring, you might get something amazing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to hold my breath for that. But it's still very nice to think about. I mean, welterweight hasn't been the most exciting division in a very long time, but I think if you get enough of these guys at the same level, fighting to see who's the best out of all of them, you're going to see some good fights. So the elites can go do what they're doing. Like, unfortunately, it's going to affect everybody in the long run. But if we get the domestic scene back to where it should be and produce some exciting talent, like look at Abdullah Mason, for example, right? That kid, I think, is going to be a world champion. And when he finally gets his belt, I hope to see a lot more matchups. Let's put him in there with Morataya. Let's put him in there with a young Vargas. Let's see what he's made of. Put him on the world stage. Let's get these fights happening. You know what I mean? Like, that would be one of the very first steps to getting this sport back where it needs to be in America. That's what ultimately what I want to see, but you know. So I guess I started with Roach and I ended with Abdullah Mason. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Have a good day.